As 14 royals lay bleeding and dying on the marble floor of the palace, they all saw the face of their killer. It was their own Crown Prince Dipendra.
There's no doubt in my mind that it was him. How can I mistake somebody at such a close range, especially a person I have known for so many years?
We all were a big question mark. Why us? And we all needed somebody to come and tell us why this happened.
This is the story of a forbidden love affair, a family tragedy, and a national nightmare. We reveal how Nepal's crown prince carefully planned and cold-bloodedly executed a royal massacre. The boy who would grow up to kill his family was born in 1971 into the medieval-style court of one of the last absolute monarchies on earth.
It was the grandest rice-feeding ceremony I've ever seen. He was the loveliest little child ever. He was so cute.
The little boy's father, Birendra, was devoted to his son, and Dipendra could do no wrong in the eyes of those around him.
Nepalese are very aware that this is the next king. And so just about everybody, I suppose, gave him that much more respect ever since he was tiny.
In 1975, the 3-year-old Dipendra watched as the world's royalty gathered to pay their respects to his parents upon their coronation. His father, the king, was revered by his subjects as one of Lord Vishnu's incarnations. And Dipendra would grow up knowing that in turn he too was destined to become a demigod. His parents were keen for the army to play a part in their son's upbringing.
I remember seeing during his father's coronation, he was in full military gear and he gave his father a very sharp salute. That was the Crown Prince. That was the future of Crown Prince. It was very militaristic.
Behind these palace gates, the little boy ruled over his own fiefdom. Even his father's top army brass would prove no match for the Crown Prince's strong will.
The top of the pond was very slippery, you see, and the Crown Prince started running. And I was afraid that, he might slip and go into the water, you see. So I requested him, Your Royal Highness, don't do it, because you might fall down. But he didn't listen to me. So I said, no, you can't do that, you see. Then he got very annoyed. He said, well, you can't order me, General. General, he said, General, you can't order me.
The young prince had to be taught that with power came obligation and self-restraint.
I used to say that the Crown Prince had inherited the best of both parents. King Birendra was a very wise person. He wasn't clever, clever. I mean, you tell him a joke, you'd have to tell him about twice or even 3 times before he understood it. But he was very wise. He tended to be almost like a hermit. And I think she made up for that side of it. She's the one who arranged all the social events, and she's the one who arranged parties. She was very intelligent, very sharp, and she understood something before you were halfway through a sentence.
Queen Aishwarya was strong-willed, and she also was very tradition-bound and was not above using pressures of her position to try and get family members to do things the way she wanted them.
The would-be demigod had inherited many of the Queen's qualities. These similarities would bring mother and son into conflict throughout their lives. On his 8th birthday, at an age when most boys would be playing with toy guns, Dipendra was given a real pistol.
All the king's sons, from their childhood, they were sent to a teacher who could teach them the art of war. So art of war comprises, learning of all the weapons. He was exceptionally good shot. To tell you frankly, he knew more about weapons than me. I'm an army man.
He talked about guns all the time. That was his favorite topic. I heard him talking with his own generation, and usually the topic would be about guns.
"22 years later, on June the 1st, 2001, the city of Kathmandu was preparing for a Friday evening of traditional family gatherings. 2 days earlier, Crown Prince Dipendra checked how many of his relatives would be attending the royal family's get-together.
I was asked, are you coming or not? Which means it was important to know whether I was going or not. And that I can only think of as he wanted to know how many people would be in the room.
The king had placed his son, the Crown Prince, in charge of security, and from the outside, the royal palace seemed well protected against surprise attack, with military police guarding its perimeter. However, each Friday, as Dipendra knew, the king's bodyguard When Dipendra was 5 years old, the family celebrated the arrival of his baby sister, Princess Shruti. As heir to the throne, the Crown Prince would receive special treatment. He was always set apart from his sister and his younger brother, Prince Narayan. The king, a would-be modernizer, wanted his son to be educated outside the confines of the palace walls. Dipendra was sent to an English-style boarding school in the Kathmandu Valley. It was a different world from the cloistered palace. For the first time in his life, the young autocrat came into contact with his subjects. Initially, he seemed stunned. But the young prince's self-confidence returned when he began to excel at sports. In his coronation speech, King Birendra had spoken of his wish to begin a new era for the creation of a just, dynamic, democratic society. He hoped that his son's Western-style education would help mould a modern monarchy, to lead a modern country. But it was impossible for his classmates to see the Crown Prince as just another drummer in the band, as Dipendra himself always knew. Despite his father's aims, the young prince grew up in a feudal world, where the army shored up the power of an absolute monarchy. Even Dipendra's karate instructor deferred to him.
In his schooling days, people were very aware that this is a future king. And that would include teachers and playmates also. He was very competitive, and yet nobody would really compete with him in Nepal.
In 1987, Dipendra was sent to Eton, where it was hoped that he would acquire the polish of an English gentleman.
He was quite rough, really. He wasn't clever with words like most boys were. You know, most boys sort of, it was cool to be a little sharp with your wit, and he wasn't sharp-witted. Maybe he wanted more of the boys to like him, but he didn't have that luxury at school and became more sort of marginalized socially as time went on at school.
In his first week, perhaps trying to impress, the half-god, half-Etonian, unwisely accepted a challenge.
He'd always talked about how much he drank back in Nepal, how much he loved brandy and would drink brandy, and brandy was the drink of choice. And so one day one of the boys asked him to go get some brandy.
A fellow Etonian sold the story. For the Crown Prince, it was a lesson on the attitude of the modern world to monarchy. From that moment on, Dipendra learnt to give nothing away.
He did bottle up his anger over particular situations and then did let loose fairly fiery on one or two occasions. I only witnessed it really in the context of karate matches where something had gone wrong and we'd lost or not done as well as we might. He waited until the next week to tell people what they'd done wrong in no uncertain terms.
One day, he asked me to come and see him perform karate. He won his match. But I thought, looking at him, that it was so risky, with the legs flying all over and you could hit your eyes. And, if you get a full shot of your leg in your eye, you might be blinded. So after the thing, I said, well, this is a risky game, absolutely. And I think I should write to your father. And he said, my God, this is one thing I like, and you're going to tell my father. So thank you. He said, thank you,
At 8:30 p.m. on June the 1st, 2001, King Birendra was the last to arrive at the family party.
His Majesty had been served a drink, which was a Coke I could make out from the glass.
Protocol dictated that all royal relatives had to ask permission to drink in the presence of the king.
okay, when he says, okay, go ahead, and then we do cheers, and His Majesty also takes, and we also take, and this is how it is done. Then suddenly I hear, behind my back, footsteps.
It was my sister who was with me, and I said to her, "Isn't he getting a bit too old to dress up like this?" And she agreed with me, and so we were watching him go towards his father. And I thought he was coming to show his father the guns. And so did the king. He took a step forward because he thought his son wanted to show him something. And he just lifted the gun and shot him.
Now I started looking at His Majesty because I was already talking to him. He looked all right for a second. Then I see him sliding on the right side, while standing, just leaning towards the right side. And while this was happening, I saw streaks of blood on the right shoulder.
It just seemed so shocking for everyone in the room. Something which is not conceivable. There was some screaming initially, but after that everyone was just looking around, looking at His Majesty, I guess. I mean, nobody actually, had the presence of mind to do anything other than that.
In 1989, the young prince visited Stoner Park, the home of his English guardian. It was here that he was introduced to a girl who would change the course of his life and the history of his country. Her name was Devyani Rana. She was from a clan whose rivalry with members of the Royal House of Nepal went back generations.
She's a very bright, intelligent, somewhat headstrong girl with a mind of her own. She's not one of those traditional sort of girls who prepare to just sit and do what the parents or anybody else wants them to do.
I remember Dippy telling me that he had fallen in love with her, then. He told me many times that, she's sort of perfect. And I would love to spend, time with her and spend my life with her. He was very keen to marry her for that reason, and want her to be his wife and to be the queen perhaps one day.
But Nepal already had a queen, and she was making her own shortlist of suitable girls for her son. As far as the Queen was concerned, that choice was hers, and hers alone. In January 1990, the Queen guided the young Etonian through a series of ancient Hindu ceremonies that would prepare him for adulthood and marriage, before a bride had even been chosen. It was an opportunity for Nepal's ruling family to display their wealth and power. But to Prince Dipendra's alarm, this royal world of ritual and deference was under threat. A few weeks after the Crown Prince had returned to school in England, the people of Nepal took to the streets to demand an end to absolute monarchy and the introduction of multi-party democracy. Fearing revolution, King Birendra caved in to their demands. He agreed that his feudal role was at an end and telephoned his son with the news.
I was told his father called him and talked to him on the phone, and he had a real bad temper tantrum after that, and he even broke a hotel door. He was very angry about the way his father handled the situation. He felt he didn't have to give up being an absolute monarch.
When he went to the West to study, he was the son of an absolute ruler. When he came back, he became the son of a constitutional figurehead, enormous, enormous difference. Because the palace didn't quite change. I mean, it was the same prehistoric system that it was 250 years ago. Everything around it changed. You can go ahead and cut ribbons as many ways you can, but an educated person needs to see some growth in what he inputs.
When Dipendra was 21, his father appointed him Colonel Commander-in-Chief of the Army. The post was purely ceremonial, but for Dipendra it would prove to be an opportunity to indulge his passion for military hardware. The King and Queen admired the British royal family and embraced the world of Western monarchy, but their son was left on the sidelines. His mother had more of a say in royal affairs than he did.
She was a very close confidant of the late king, and as such also she had access to state matters, and therefore she was perhaps one of his principal key advisors on many happenings that took place in the kingdom.
The Queen advised her husband there were only 2 girls in the entire kingdom suitable to become Crown Princess. Devyani Rana, now back at her parents' home in Kathmandu, was not one of them. Perhaps because her face was unforgettable, or perhaps because she had been forbidden to him, the Crown Prince began to pursue Devyani.
Initially, I think she was a little apprehensive, getting these phone calls from someone who is the Crown Prince of Nepal. They grew to be very good friends. So she overcame her little apprehension. I think the qualities of him being caring, sensitive, considerate, also being, very persistent with her. And yes, and he was the sort of married. And I remember him laughing and saying, of course, she's the only woman I'm going to marry. And, he'd take out his wallet and I'd show me her photograph that he always carried. And said, of course, we will, but, you have to understand I need to get the approval of my parents because my father's my father, he's also my king, and I am the Crown Prince.
Devyani's mother came from the royal family of the Indian state of Gwalior. In the days of the Raj, these vastly rich Maharajas claimed the highest honour of a 21-gun salute from the British Army. Their power and influence, displayed here at a family wedding, remains strong to this day. But all this was not enough for the royal house of Nepal.
Queen Aishwarya felt that the royalty of Gwalior state was of a slightly lower caste than the average Indian royalty, and hence beneath the Nepali royalty. So marrying to them, howsoever large their power and their reach and their popularity, would nevertheless be seen on a status scale to be lower than the Nepali royalty. On the other hand, all of that might have been a front to get her son to marry whom she wanted.
To make matters worse, Devyani's father was a politician, and from a rival clan to the Queen's own. But many felt the real reason for the Queen's dislike of Devyani was personal. She looked ahead and feared being pushed aside. The Queen looked for allies in her battle against her son's lover. She found them in Dipendra's sister, Princess Shruti, and her new son-in-law, Gorak.
More than love, I think ego might have influenced his decision, because all his life he had sort of always got what he wanted. Nobody would say no to a crown prince. Everyone would try to reason with him as to why he would be marrying this girl, or why he shouldn't be marrying this girl, or why he should, continue the traditions of the family. He shot them.
The look on his face was very scary. I still remember it, and still it gives me the creeps when I remember his face. He really looked exactly like the Terminator 2. Absolutely expressionless, but very concentrated. And it still haunts me, that look of his.
As the king lay bleeding, Dipendra's uncle challenged his gun-toting nephew.
He shot point blank. He literally flew and landed a couple of feet back. Our eyes met, and it was so cold, no emotion. It's like he knew what he was doing, basically. I thought for a second maybe he was hesitating. But then, next thing I know, I had been hit.
Princess Shruti ran to her injured husband.
She came close and she saw her husband had been shot also, and she said, "You too?" And then she just sat there and put her husband's head on her lap.
And I just grabbed her hand and I pulled her towards me, and I told her, even I have been shot. If you can run away, it looks like, he's going to finish everyone in the room.
By his late 20s, Dipendra was suffering increasingly from problems all too familiar to crown princes around the world.
हाम्रा ग्रामीण जनताले भोग्नु परेको दुःख र कठिनाई निवारणका निमित्त युवराज चार्ल्सको संरक्षण प्राप्त संस्थाहरूद्वारा देशका कतिपय जिल्लाहरूमा लोकोपकारी कार्यहरू सम्पन्न भइरहेका छन्।
Deep in his mind, he always wanted to create something parallel to the Prince's Trust. That was his aspiration. I saw in him a very disillusioned, frustrated young man who wanted to do a lot, but was pretty much stopped from doing a lot that he could do because of the circumstances. He would not have vented his frustration against his parents in public. It's not just a father and son relationship, it's the king and the crown prince. So this is a completely different plane altogether.
Like many of the king's subjects, the crown prince had been brought up to revere his father as a living incarnation of Lord Vishnu. But as with his mother, a rift was beginning to tear Dipendra and his father apart. The reason was political. By the year 2000, Nepal was sliding into chaos as Maoist guerrillas gained footholds in many of the poorer parts of the kingdom. In his coronation speech, the king had spoken of his desire to see the hungry fed, the naked clothed, and the sick tended. But after 25 years of promises, his subjects were looking elsewhere for salvation. Putting his faith in parliamentary democracy, the king refused to send in the army to crush the rebels. But his son Dipendra began to believe the only solution to his country's problems was force. Fearing revolution, he began to stockpile weapons in his bedroom. Ten years after Dipendra first met Devyani, he had reached a stalemate with his family, his country, and his lover. Worst of all, his parents now faced him with an impossible choice: his royal position or marriage to Devyani Rana. He could not have both.
Clearly, he was bent on marrying Devyani, but if he were to be told, you can do that, but then you lose your royal privileges, for a man like Dipendra, that would be losing a lot, because what he had to show to the world more than anything else was his royal status.
The Crown Prince was further humiliated when his younger sister, the king's favourite, Princess Shruti, produced the first royal grandchild. Under pressure, the Crown Prince began to flaunt his love affair in Kathmandu's fashionable restaurants. He started to drink more heavily and to smoke marijuana.
I mean, how would one control a 20 to 30-year-old guy, he's educated? How do you try to do anything to such a person? And on top of that, he's also the Crown Prince, so that even, I guess, makes it difficult for you to go and say, you shouldn't be doing this. It's a delicate, difficult, and a very awkward situation.
Dipendra's sister, Princess Shruti, did try to break through royal protocol and talk to her brother on his 29th birthday.
Nobody hates anybody. Nobody. I mean, I've never heard of anybody hitting anybody. Her case was the first case when she came and said, look, my brother hit me and she had a bruise here. And I was like, my God, I mean, I don't know what to say because, firstly he's the Crown Prince. Then, and I just said, that's not done. It's just hitting. You could be anybody. You don't hit a woman.
Princess Shruti had left her brother's party with bruises on her face. Dipendra had shocked the young royals by announcing he would marry Devyani. If prevented, the family would bear the consequences.
What he said was, well, it's been difficult for me to reach a decision. I mean, I've toyed with the idea for 6 or 7 years as to who I should get married to, and I've made up my choice. And my wife reacted, saying, "Oof, that basically means, what are you saying?" Then he just literally ran across and he just caught her by her throat and pushed her to the ground and was right about to kick her. And she was about 5 months pregnant then. And I really
could not do anything because that would be considered inappropriate for me to do because he's the crown prince. He was literally shouting, you're either with me or you're not with me. And anyone who gets in my way, I'll finish them, literally kill them. Whether it be my father, mother, finish the monarchy and bring down the institution with me.
The threat was so sinister that those present found it unbelievable. One year later, what seemed like the hollow words of a drunk had become a terrible reality.
I saw the king just put up his hand and the look he gave his son. And I could see he was saying, I can contain the damage, but if you take a step further, I can't help you. I've never seen such a stern look from King Birendra. And yet he shot him through the head.
Dipendra now turned towards his sister.
I heard a shot and I actually felt her strength, give way. I felt like she was holding me, and that strength slowly sort of, gradually faded away, and she fell down.
Then he just shot everybody, and he aimed and he shot at their heads.
He was out there spraying bullets, like a madman.
He shot my shoulder off, but the blood all came all over my face and my head. So he must have thought he got me in the head also. I watched him kill Princess Sharda. She tried to put her body between him and her husband. And I just saw the back of her head go flying off.
And he just went around kicking some bodies and just shooting them from close range at their heads, and just to ensure that they had died. And I just remember the light going across my eyes. And I was thinking to myself, oh God, he's going to shoot me in my head and I'm going to die now. The bullet hit my thumb and entered my body, so my thumb took a lot of impact. But by losing a thumb, I guess, it saved my life.
The Queen saw her eldest son leave 12 members of the family bleeding and dying on the billiard room floor. As he disappeared into the dark of the palace gardens, she ran after him, followed by her youngest son, Prince Narayan.
I heard the shots outside. And 2 bursts and 2 single shots. And then maybe I sort of passed out from a loss of blood.
Much too late. The military aides at their posts inside the palace finally took some action. They rushed the bodies of the dead and dying royal family through Kathmandu's traffic-clogged streets, past the monarchy's oblivious subjects. But by the time the chaotic convoy reached the army hospital, King Birendra was already dead. The mass carnage astounded even the most experienced doctors.
He showed me a body and says, "This is Her Majesty." And I couldn't believe the whole head was split into literally 2 halves in the top part, and she was lifeless. Next he showed me Prince Narayan, horrendous injuries. He was also gone.
The Queen's body had been found on the 7th step of the staircase leading to her son's bedroom. Dipendra was still breathing when he was brought into hospital. He had a single 9mm bullet wound to the head. The doctors prepared to do the best they could.
And one could say it was a penetrating injury running from one temple to the other. And the entry wound was on the left and the exit was on the right. This sort of injury is compatible both ways. It could be suicidal, it could be homicidal.
As light came to Kathmandu on the morning of June the 2nd, it became clear that a comatose murderer was next in line to the throne.
At 9 o'clock, when I reassessed the Crown Prince, he had in fact improved to the extent that he was moving his limbs, trying to breathe, and this medical fact had tremendous importance politically for the country and what course of action they had to take.
Nepalese mourned as their leaders, seemingly paralyzed by the horror of events, clung to tradition and protocol.
Suputra, Raj Gaddi, Uttradhikari, Sripas, Yuvraj Dhiraj, Dipendra Veer Vikram Sahadev, Vikram Sambat, 2058 साल ज्येष्ठ 19 गते रोज 6 का दिन 6 देखि नेपाल अधिराज्यको श्री 5 महाराज भइबक्सेको घोषणा गर्दछौं।
I still refer to him as a crown prince. I will never refer to him as king. First of all, he actually committed treason. If you shoot a king, it's high treason by any accounts according to our law. The natural course of justice would have been like it would have done to me. He would have to be put behind bars.
Maybe there was a reason that they named him king, but to me it was, I felt betrayed.
The injuries King Dipendra had inflicted upon his mother were so bad the remains of her head had to be covered with the face of a china doll.
Well, I was still pretty drugged at that time, but I heard the national anthem and I knew that they would be taking them away. And I'm glad I was partly unconscious at that time, because the wound was still very raw at that time, physically and mentally, and it would have been very hard to face that.
As his victims were mourned, the young woman King Dipendra had intended to make his queen went into hiding.
I don't think that she could believe that he could do something like this at all, ever. It was difficult for her, to know that he was alone in a hospital room. She would have wanted to be with him, but it wasn't, I don't think that it would have been possible.
Devyani was no less a victim of that event than the people who were actually killed. She was, in some ways you can say she was lucky to escape alive. But the psychological toll that it took upon her obviously was very deep. That will remain a burning scar in her inner consciousness.
Fearing for her life, Devyani fled Nepal. She has not yet returned to her homeland. The reign of her lover will surely be remembered as one of the shortest and strangest in history. King Dipendra was finally declared dead at 3:45 a.m. on June the 4th, 2001. His uncle, Gyanendra, became Nepal's third king in 3 days. Riots broke out as many in Nepal refused to believe that a son, let alone a crown prince, could kill his parents. The streets were brutally cleared in time for yet another state funeral. As Dipendra's body was sped towards the sacred cremation ground, many wondered how the mind of a crown prince could have deteriorated into that of a killer without any restraints being placed upon him or help being offered to him.
Obviously, who is going to be the head of the state in future? One expects a perfect personality. It's all, media expects them to be perfect, people expect them to be perfect. If there is some weakness in the personality exposed outside, that is not going to help them. To declare that the future king had psychiatric problem, it has got very serious implications indeed.
These photographs were taken on the last day of Dipendra's life. They show the face of a young man born to be revered as a demigod, torn apart by a conflict between his earthly wishes and the impossibility of fulfilling ancient royal traditions in a modern world. Perhaps because of protocol in a medieval-style court, the political implications of instability within a palace, or because of a family's inability to recognize the flaws in their eldest son, a royal dynasty was blown away and a nation's belief in itself shattered.
I was sorry that such a young man should die such a death, and also feeling sorry for him that what sort of dreams we had for him. I was also sorry that he should perform such a heinous crime, and to frankly, I was praying that God should have pity on him.